Morning in Cedar Hill usually carried a quiet rhythm, snow resting on porch rails, trucks warming in driveways, and the wind brushing against old wooden fences like it had all the time in the world. But on this particular winter morning, something felt wrong before anyone understood why. It was the kind of silence people notice without noticing, an instinctive pause like the whole town held its breath. Inside Madison Ridge Community Hospital, the day had begun like any other, nurses clutching hot coffee, an orderly restocking blankets, the receptionist reviewing charts. The soft hum of machines filled the lobby. Then the automatic doors opened, and everything shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, almost respectfully. Boone entered first. The old canine shepherd moved with a staggering limp, his fur soaked from the Montana snow, each breath shallow and uneven. He looked like he'd walked miles through something that didn't want to let him go. At first, no one paid attention. Cedar Hill was small enough that pets weren't unusual. But then a nurse gasped, because she saw what Boone was carrying. A child, a little girl. Harper Lane, missing for 3 long days, lay draped across the dog's back like a faded memory. Her arms dangling, her face pale beneath dried flecks of frost. The red scarf around her neck was stiff with cold. Her small fingers curled as if holding on to the last piece of warmth she remembered. The nurse's clipboard slipped and clattered on the floor. No one even blinked. Boone took another step. His legs trembled violently. His pad slid on the tile, leaving faint streaks of melted snow behind him. His eyes, clouded with exhaustion but startlingly aware, locked onto the medical staff as if he had returned from the mountains with a message too urgent for words. Then his body gave out. Not a crash, not a collapse of fear, but the surrender of a guardian who had walked until there was nothing left to give. Harper slid an inch down his side, and that tiny movement snapped the entire lobby into motion. She's breathing, barely. We need a stretcher. Move. Get warm blankets. Get the dog, too. He's injured badly. Feet pounded against linoleum. The intercom spat out clipped instructions. Someone radioed for more staff. A nurse knelt beside Boone, her voice shaking as she touched his shoulder gently, whispering reassurance he might, or might not, hear. Boone didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. Even half-conscious, he lifted his head just enough to watch Harper being carried toward emergency care, until his strength finally failed. His chin lowered to the floor, eyes still open, still following her until she disappeared beyond the trauma doors. And in that instant, the silence returned. But now it felt different, heavier, full of questions no one dared speak aloud. How far had this dog traveled? Why was he alone with her? What had they endured in the mountains? And most of all, how had he kept her alive? Doctors exchanged glances, confused, shaken, humbled. The scene felt less like a medical emergency, and more like the final echo of a miracle someone had dragged in from the snow. And as Boone's breathing thinned, one truth settled over everyone present. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a mission. And whatever had pushed Boone through the storm to deliver that child came from a place deeper than instinct. It came from devotion. Harper Lane opened her eyes the way someone surfaces from a long, heavy lake, slow, uncertain, almost afraid the air above might hurt just as much as the darkness below. The light above her was bright, too bright. It carried the sterile chill of an ICU room where time didn't exist. Machines hummed in steady rhythms, the kind nurses barely noticed anymore. But to Harper, each beep sounded like a voice calling her back from somewhere she didn't want to remember. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She simply lay there, her small chest rising in shallow breaths, eyes scanning shapes she couldn't place. A curtain drawn halfway, a tray of instruments, a folded blanket someone had set aside for warmth. Her world felt rearranged, like someone had taken all the pieces she knew and put them back in the wrong order. Dr. Miriam Cole stepped into her line of sight. Not abruptly, not with the usual efficiency she used in emergencies, but with a quiet, deliberate softness meant for moments that could break a person if handled wrong. Her voice came low. "Sweetheart, you're safe. You're in the hospital." Harper blinked, absorbing none of it. The word safe didn't land. The word hospital didn't matter. Her lips parted just enough to whisper a single name. Boone. Is Boone alive? The question trembled through the room like someone had opened a window to a colder wind. Miriam had prepared answers for injuries, for trauma, for fear. But she had not prepared for this fierce, instinctive plea from a girl who had nearly frozen to death. She pulled a stool close. Her voice softened even more. "Boone is here," she said gently. "He's hurt, but he's fighting." Harper's eyes fluttered, and for an instant, something raw moved across her face. Relief tangled with dread. Her small hand, still bearing faint impressions from days of cold, lifted off the blanket, trembled, and fell back. Can he see me?" she whispered. Miriam swallowed. He tried, even when he shouldn't have. Outside the glass pane of the ICU bay, Boone lay on a heated mat, surrounded by staff monitoring him closely. His breathing was thin, uneven, but every few minutes he looked toward Harper's room, like the simple act of knowing she was alive was the only reason he hadn't slipped under. The veterinary technician knelt beside him, murmuring steady reassurance. The quiet kind often overlooked in rural hospitals. Harper didn't know any of that, but she felt it. Children sense devotion the way flowers sense sunlight. She wet her lips, choked a little, then whispered, "He came for me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a memory. It was a truth spoken by someone who had depended on a heartbeat that wasn't her own. Miriam hesitated, a shadow flickering across her expression. A memory of her own child, lost years ago, rose like an unwelcome ghost. She pressed it down gently. "He did," Miriam whispered. "He brought you all the way here." Harper closed her eyes, not in rest, but in surrender. Tears ran sideways into her hair. Not loud tears, but the kind adults recognize. Tears from long nights spent trying to hold themselves together. "Don't let him be alone," she said softly. "He never left me." A nurse stepped into the doorway, clipboard in hand, but Miriam raised a quiet hand to stop her. Harper needed space, to breathe, to trust, to return in pieces, not all at once. Miriam squeezed Harper's hand once, then stood. "I won't let him be alone," she promised. "Not tonight." As she stepped into the hallway, Boone lifted his head, barely, and their eyes met. And in that moment, Miriam realized something quietly, something she couldn't explain, not medically, not logically. Boone wasn't looking for help. He was waiting for news about one small girl who had whispered his name like a lifeline. Time 1.2, Boone was holding on, because she had asked him to. The moment Dr. Miriam Cole whispered to herself that Boone was holding on because Harper needed him, Deputy Ray Maddox was already miles away, steering his truck toward the timberline where the cold swallowed the sky. Cedar Hills Sheriff's Office had ordered a full search and rescue review, not just to retrace Boone's path, but to understand how a 7-year-old girl survived 3 nights in terrain even seasoned hikers avoided in winter. As the tires crunched through old ice, Ray felt something settling across his shoulders. Not dread exactly, but a quiet knowing that this wasn't over. He parked near the start of Elk Ridge Trail, familiar in summer, unrecognizable now beneath untouched snow. The air smelled sharp, like pine needles frozen in place. This was the kind of cold that usually erased traces of life. But today, the snow preserved them. Ray crouched beside a long, wavering trail of footprints. One set was small, uneven, dragging slightly, the exhausted steps of a child. The other set was Boone's, wide, deep impressions spaced irregularly, suggesting he had stumbled more than once yet kept going. The two trails intertwined again and again, circling each other like threads knotted by desperation. "Boone, what were you carrying her through?" Ray murmured. He followed the tracks deeper into the trees. The wind was still. Branches hung heavy with frost. 100 yards in, he spotted a darkened patch beneath a fallen log. Kneeling, he brushed away snow with his gloved fingers. Ash. Bits of charred bark. A fire. Someone had built a fire here. Too small. Too weak. Too quickly abandoned. Ray felt his pulse tick upward. Fire meant shelter. Shelter meant someone else had been here with Harper. He scanned the area, switching from instinct to trained law enforcement focus. Something half buried near the rocks caught his eye. A torn piece of red yarn. It matched Harper's scarf, frayed at the edges when Boone carried her in, pocketed it gently, then moved on. Near a slope where the trail curved, Ray found markings on the stone. Fresh, sharp, deliberate. Long scratches, not made by an animal. Too straight, too purposeful. Someone had clawed at the rock, either trying to climb or trying to escape. He touched the grooves, imagining small hands gripping stone, frozen fingertips scraping for a way out. The forest suddenly felt too quiet. One more clue waited ahead. He didn't see it until he stepped around a thick pine. A hoof print, large, deep, pressed into the snow. Ray's breath fogged in the air. A wild horse. This high up, in this weather, made no sense. But Cedar Hill had a legend. One that refused to fade. Baldur, the ghost-colored stallion, known to roam the backcountry alone. People claimed he appeared during storms or when someone was lost. Most chalked it up to myth, campfire talk, winter stories. Yet here, in the snow, was a hoof print that didn't belong to any ranch horse. Ray reached for his radio, then hesitated. He didn't want chatter or noise. He wanted truth. He whispered into the stillness. "Harper, what did you see out here?" As he turned back toward the truck, the wind kicked up, swirling snow around the footprints. It felt like the forest wanted to bury the truth before he could piece it together. But Ray had learned something in his years of service. When a trail tries to hide itself, it's because the story isn't ready to be forgotten. At the base of the hill, he paused, staring up into the cold Montana sky, a knot forming low in his stomach. Someone had been out here with Harper, someone who wasn't Boone, and they might still be watching. If you were Ray uncovering these clues in the snow, what would you fear most? The unknown person out there, timed 600, the mountain itself, or what Harper isn't saying yet? By the time Deputy Ray Maddox returned from the mountain, snow melting from his jacket as he pushed through the hospital doors, the quiet in Madison Ridge felt heavier, as if the building itself sensed truths moving beneath the surface. Nurses whispered in clipped tones, not from panic, but from the focused urgency that comes when a case crosses the line between medical treatment and trauma recovery. Dr. Miriam Cole stood beside Harper's bed, reviewing her vitals beneath the cool glow of overhead lights. Harper had drifted into a fragile sleep, curled slightly to her side, one hand resting palm down on the blanket, the way a child presses her fingers into warm soil just to remind herself she's alive. The monitors glowed steady, though every rise and fall of her breathing seemed too delicate for the room. But what caught Miriam's attention wasn't Harper. It was Boone. He lay just outside the glass partition, a heated mat beneath him, an IV running along his side. His breaths were shallow, muscles twitching as though he kept trying to stand. Every few minutes, his head lifted, just barely, turning toward Harper's bed. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but it was the most intentional thing in the room. Miriam looked from the dog to the girl, and back again. "Boone," she murmured, stepping into the hallway. "You shouldn't be awake. You're burning through whatever strength you have left." But he lifted his head again, slow, certain, as if answering a question she hadn't asked. Ray approached quietly. "How's she doing?" "She's stable," Miriam whispered. "But it's her mind I'm worried about. She trembles when she sleeps. Her heart rate spikes when the room goes quiet." It's not just exhaustion. It's fear stitched into her bones. Ray nodded, jaw tight. And him? Miriam's eyes softened. He reacts to her vitals before the monitors do. When she flinches, he shudders. When she settles, he eases. It's like some invisible thread ties them together. Ray leaned closer to the window, watching Boone's chest rise and fall. That dog walked miles through a blizzard to bring her back. If that's not devotion, if that's not mental health support in its purest form, I don't know what is. As if hearing his name, Harper stirred. Her lashes fluttered. Her small hand rose, reaching outward, touching nothing but cool air. A faint whimper escaped her throat, more longing than fear. Boone's ears lifted. His eyes opened fully for the first time since he'd collapsed. Then, still weak, he dragged himself an inch forward. Miriam gasped. "Boone, no, stay put." But he didn't stop. His front paw stretched toward the glass, claws tapping softly against it. His gaze locked onto the outline of Harper's hand inside the room, and it was clear he recognized the gesture. Harper jolted awake, not from fear, but from instinct. Her hand lifted again, reaching toward the same spot on her side of the glass. Their movements matched, slow, unsure, but perfectly synchronized. Ray whispered, "It's like they're speaking without words." Harper's breathing steadied. Boone lowered his head to the floor, but his paw remained pressed to the glass, anchoring her. And in a way Miriam couldn't explain, Harper's heart monitor softened, its frantic edge easing into something almost peaceful. Miriam felt her throat tighten, not with fear, but with recognition. This wasn't coincidence, not attachment, not gratitude. This was a bond forged in survival, raw, complicated, deeper than anything she'd seen in all her years of compassionate care. Boone wasn't guarding Harper out of training. He was guarding her because leaving her, even for a moment, would mean abandoning the only thing that had kept him alive. Miriam placed a warm blanket over Harper. Her voice was low, steady. "You're not alone," she whispered. "Not as long as he's here." Outside, Boone's breathing settled into a trembling rhythm. Shallow, stubborn, unbroken. "Time, Ma." His eyes didn't close. He held his vigil the way lanterns hold light. Quietly, unwavering, refusing to ask permission from the dark. Night fell early over Cedar Hill. The kind of Montana darkness that settles not just over the streets, but over the quiet spaces inside a person's chest. Snow drifted steadily past the hospital windows, catching in the soft glow of outdoor lamps. Inside, the halls were calmer now. Voices reduced to murmurs, machines humming low, the faint scent of disinfectant mixing with winter air each time the automatic doors opened. Harper was asleep again. Her small hand curled around the edge of her blanket instead of reaching for Boone. The stability was fragile, but real enough that Miriam allowed herself one slow breath. Boone, though weak, lay outside her door, his paw resting against the glass, a pose Miriam had come to recognize as his silent promise. Ray had stepped out to follow new leads, but he warned the staff before leaving. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, call me. Fast. Home security systems won't help you with someone who knows how to disappear into the dark. The words echoed in Miriam's mind long after he was gone. Around 9 o'clock, a hush fell over the waiting area. Not the peaceful kind. This one had an edge to it. A volunteer at the front desk squinted toward the glass entrance. "Miriam, do you see that?" she whispered. A figure stood just beyond the outer doors. Still. Too still. The person wore a long, dark coat, hood pulled low enough to hide most of his face. Snow clung to his shoulders, melting slowly, streaking down fabric that didn't match the attire of anyone who lived in town. His breath fogged outward in deliberate, steady clouds, too calm for someone seeking help. He wasn't moving toward the hospital. He was watching it. Miriam felt her stomach tighten. She stepped forward quietly, careful not to alarm the others. But Boone noticed instantly. The dog's ears lifted. His head turned toward the doors. Then, with a sound Miriam hadn't heard from him since he arrived, a strained, hollow growl, Boone tried to rise. "Boone, don't," Miriam whispered, pressing her hand to the glass. But instinct overpowered pain. Boone dragged himself half upright, legs trembling, chest tightening with effort. His gaze locked on the shadowed figure outside, like a compass finding true north. At that same moment, Harper stirred in her sleep. A faint whimper slipped from her throat. The timing was too perfect, too aligned. Boone growled again, louder this time, not from anger, but from memory. A nurse hurried toward the front doors, but before she reached them, the figure stepped backward. One slow, deliberate movement, acknowledging he'd been seen. Then he turned, not hurriedly, not fearfully, just a measured pivot that chilled everyone watching. Snow swallowed him within seconds. By the time security reached the entrance, nothing remained but fading footprints leading toward the tree line. Miriam exhaled shakily. "Call Ray," she said. "Now." The guard grabbed his radio. "Requesting law enforcement support. Possible trespasser. Suspicious behavior." When Miriam returned to Harper's room, the girl was sitting upright, eyes wide though not fully awake. Boone had collapsed again, but his gaze never left her, his chest rising too fast. Harper's voice cracked through the quiet. "He's here, isn't he?" Miriam froze. "Who, sweetheart?" Harper didn't blink. "The man who said I wouldn't get away." Outside the room, Boone let out a low, broken, unmistakable warning. And for the first time since Harper arrived, Miriam understood. This wasn't just fear clinging to the child. This was recognition. The quiet inside Madison Ridge Hospital, after Harper's trembling words, felt different now, as if the walls themselves were listening. Nurses moved softly, exchanging glances filled not with panic, but with questions none of them dared to voice. And Boone, who had spent hours gathering the last strands of his strength, lay with his head against the glass, eyes half open, alert in a way that made the night shift staff uneasy. Outside, snow kept falling, muffling the world. Inside, danger felt closer than sound. Harper was asleep again, her small hand curled around her blanket instead of reaching for Boone. The stability was fragile, but real enough that Miriam allowed herself a single steady breath. Boone, though weak, kept his paw resting against the corner of the glass, a gesture Miriam had come to recognize as his silent promise. Ray had stepped out to follow new leads, but before leaving, he warned, "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, call me. Fast. Home security won't save you from someone who knows how to disappear into the dark." The words kept echoing long after he was gone. Around 9 o'clock, a hush fell over the waiting area. Not the peaceful kind, the sharpened kind that makes nurses turn their heads without knowing why. A volunteer at the front desk whispered, "Miriam, do you see that?" A figure stood beyond the outer doors. Still, too still. A long dark coat, a hood pulled low, snow melting slowly along his shoulders, streaking down fabric that didn't belong to anyone in town. His breath fogged outward in calm, deliberate clouds, too calm for someone seeking help. He wasn't approaching the hospital. He was watching it. Miriam's stomach tightened. She stepped forward, carefully, quietly. But Boone noticed instantly. His ears twitched. His head lifted. Then, a low, hollow growl escaped his throat. A sound scraped up from somewhere deep in memory. Miriam froze. "Boone, what is it?" Boone didn't answer. He shifted his weight, claws dragging weakly against the floor. His IV line pulled taut. His stitched flank trembled. Every breath looked like it hurt, but he was still trying to stand. "Don't you dare," Miriam whispered, rushing closer. "You can't stand. You're not strong enough." But he ignored her. Inch by trembling inch, Boone forced his body upright, collapsing against the glass for support. His eyes narrowed toward the far end of the hallway, where lights flickered in irregular patterns. The hospital's alert systems were reliable. This wasn't a power issue. This was something else. And Boone recognized it. At that exact moment, Harper gasped in her sleep. Her heart rate spiked sharply on the monitor. Miriam spun. "No, not both of you at once." Harper's small body curled inward, fists tightening around the blanket. A faint cry slipped from her lips, the kind of cry too hurt to be loud. Boone staggered. Then his legs buckled completely. He collapsed. Not gracefully, not gently, but utterly. "Code to hallway 3. Critical care assistance, now." Miriam ran to Harper, brushing hair from her forehead, adjusting her oxygen line. Harper's breath was sharp, shallow, panicked, dragged from a place darker than dreams. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe. You're safe," Miriam whispered, though her voice shook with fear she dared not name. Down the hall, Boone lay motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. The night shift team surrounded him, sliding a stretcher beneath his limp body. Temperature dropping. Heart rate unstable. He's crashing. Take him to Bay 2. Harper's eyes snapped open. Her head jerked upward, wild and disoriented. Where is he? She choked. Boone. Where did he go? Miriam placed a calming hand on her shoulder. But Harper flinched, as though the world had tilted beneath her. He's hurt again, she whispered. A voice so small it barely reached the doorway. Something in that whisper felt too connected to Boone's collapse, like their bodies were mirrors, cracking where the other had shattered first. Outside the room, Boone was wheeled away. Inside, Harper stared upward, trembling as though she could feel the distance stretching between them. And for the first time since she arrived, Miriam understood the frightening truth. Harper wasn't reacting to Boone's condition. Boone was reacting to hers. When dawn finally crept over Cedar Hill, the first pale streaks of light brushed across the hospital corridors like a hand smoothing rumpled cloth. The night had dragged on under the weight of something unspoken. Boone's collapse, Harper's panic, and the lingering dread of a shadow hovering just beyond the edge of memory. Harper sat upright now, wrapped in a soft fleece blanket someone had tucked around her before sunrise. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't looking at the room. She was somewhere else, somewhere the hospital lights could not reach. Miriam entered quietly, carrying warm water and a gentle tone reserved for the most delicate moments in child counseling. She didn't sit right away. She simply watched Harper, noticing the way the girl's fingers clutched the blanket, not tightly, but rhythmically, as if feeling the heartbeat of something she couldn't ignore. Harper, Miriam said softly, can you tell me what woke you last night? Harper didn't answer at first. Her gaze drifted toward the glass wall, the empty stretch of hallway where Boone had been before the emergency team carried him away. The absence of his silhouette felt louder than any alarm. When she finally spoke, her voice was so thin it barely survived the air. I heard him again. Miriam pulled a chair closer, leaning forward. Who did you hear, sweetheart? Harper swallowed, eyes falling to her hands. The man. The man from the woods. A hush settled over the room, not fear, clarification, pieces sliding gently into place. Miriam nodded, encouraging, without pushing. You don't have to tell me everything at once, she said softly. Just the part that feels safe. Harper's breaths came uneven, but she began anyway. He made me stay in a little shack, with gaps in the walls. The wind came in at night, and I couldn't feel my fingers. Her voice faltered. Time 500. He told me not to cry, but I did. I always did. Miriam's heart clenched, but she kept her tone steady. You were very brave. Harper shook her head quickly, so fast her hair brushed her cheeks. No, Boone was brave, He found me. He kept me warm when the fire went out. He stood between me and the door. Shadows flickered behind her eyes. Splintered wood, frozen breath, a world narrowed to fear and frost. "Did the man ever hurt you?" Miriam asked gently, mindful of boundaries, mindful of the fragile edge of disclosure. Harper hesitated. Her breathing quickened. He didn't like when I tried to call for help. He said Boone couldn't save me. He said nobody could. Pressure settled beneath Miriam's ribs. "But Boone did save you," she whispered. Harper nodded, but her gaze drifted again toward the hallway. "He heard me last night, too," she whispered, "even though he was far away." Miriam spoke carefully. "You think he felt what you felt?" Harper nodded again, slower this time. "When I was scared, he got scared. When I dreamed, he shook, like he wanted to get back to me but didn't know how." A tremor crossed her face, a memory snapping loose. "I remember something else," she whispered. "It's fuzzy, but I think Boone barked at the man before we ran. Loud. Louder than I'd ever heard him. The man yelled, and then Boone pushed me. He made me move." Miriam leaned closer. "Did Boone lead you out of the woods?" Harper lifted her eyes, truly lifted them, for the first time since arriving. "He didn't lead me. He carried me. He didn't let me walk. He didn't let me stop. He didn't let me disappear." Her small shoulders shook once, not from terror, but from the fragile relief of naming something she had pushed deep inside. Miriam brushed Harper's hand gently, her voice warm, steady, sure. "You're safe now. I promise. Cedar Hill has people who will protect you, and Boone is still with you, even if he's in another room." The truth landed, but not fully. Harper's eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, as though expecting Boone to round the corner at any moment. And somewhere deep within, Miriam realized, Harper wasn't afraid to remember the woods. She was afraid to remember what she saw before Boone found her. A knock sounded at the door. Ray Maddox stepped in, face drawn, hat in hand. "Harper," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something about the man you saw." The girl stiffened, clutching the blanket again. And so began the unraveling of details she had never wanted to say aloud. Ray Maddox didn't sleep. Not after speaking with Harper. Not after watching her shrink into the blankets the moment he mentioned the man from the woods. Something in her eyes unsettled him more than any footprint or broken branch he had found earlier. Kids Harper's age didn't look that far away, unless they'd seen something their minds had no language for. So when the sun lifted over Cedar Hill, Ray was already back in the mountains. The air held that sharp, metallic edge only Montana winters could produce. Clean, bitter, and strangely spiritual, as if the wind were reminding humans they lived here only on borrowed time. His boots broke the snow with a soft crunch. He followed the trail from the day before, deeper into the pines, where the forest held its breath the way Harper had. He wasn't looking for the man. Not yet. This morning, he was looking for something else. Anything Boone or Harper might have encountered that could explain the strange second set of clues. He paused when he reached the spot where he'd found the claw marks scraped into stone. Kneeling, he touched the grooves again, feeling how sharp they were. No child could have made them. No common tool matched the pattern. These marks were desperate, but not random. Someone had fought to get away. Someone had either clawed up the rock or been dragged past it. Ray stood, letting his gaze travel across the slope. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, erasing most signs of struggle, but not everything. A faint depression led downslope, where the snow had settled unevenly. He followed it, breath fogging in steady bursts. And then he saw it. A hoof print. Huge. Deep. Distinct. Ray knelt, brushing the surface gently. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. Only one creature in this part of Montana left a mark like that. Baldur, the elusive wild stallion spoken of as more myth than animal. A pale giant, seen at dusk, near storms, moving as though he belonged more to the wind than to the earth. Ray had dismissed the stories, many times. But the print beneath his boots didn't care what he believed. He rose slowly, scanning the trees. "Were you here when she ran, old boy? Or when Boone carried her out?" A sudden gust pushed through the pines, bending branches in a long, low sweep. Ray shivered. He found more hoof impressions several yards away, wide spacing, indicating the horse had moanput at speed. But then the tracks stopped. Cleanly, abruptly, as though Baldur had appeared and vanished between one heartbeat and the next. Ray exhaled through his teeth. Damn ghost horse. Then he noticed something else near the base of a spruce tree, something half buried in snow. He brushed it gently. A piece of rope, frayed at one end. Not cut. Broken. Violently broken. Next to it, a scrap of faded flannel, the kind used for makeshift shelter in old cabins. Ray straightened slowly. This wasn't random. This wasn't a lost child case. This was a campsite, a hideout, a place someone had prepared. The air felt heavier. Ray radioed in. "I've got evidence, rope, fabric, possibly from a temporary shelter. Also, horse tracks, big ones." "Horse tracks?" the dispatcher asked. "Any ranchers up there recently?" "No," Ray said. "This one wasn't shod, and it's larger than average." He almost added, "and it might have been watching," but kept that to himself. As he turned to head back, a faint sound drifted through the trees. Not a snort, not a hoof step, but something like a deep exhale carried by the wind. Ray froze, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but he felt it, like he wasn't alone. On the way back, His mind circled the same questions. Why would a wild horse linger near a child in danger? How had Boone survived long enough to find her? And what exactly was Harper still too afraid to say? As Ray stepped out of the forest into the pale morning light, one truth settled cold in his chest. Whatever happened to Harper in those woods, Boone wasn't the only witness. By the time Ray Maddox returned to Cedar Hill with the rope and flannel scrap sealed in evidence bags, the hospital hallways had changed. Subtly, almost imperceptibly. Staff moved more cautiously, lowering their voices even when no one was sleeping. The air buzzed with an unease the building's old radiators couldn't warm away. It reminded Ray of storms, how the wind died down just before the sky tore open. Miriam stood at the nurse's station reviewing Harper's chart, but her expression carried a distant heaviness. "How is he?" Ray asked quietly. "Boone?" She exhaled. "Holding on. They stabilized him after treatment bay 2. He's sedated now, but he kept trying to get up, even half-conscious." Ray nodded, jaw tightening. That dog knows more than we do. Before Miriam could respond, a soft chime sounded from the security panel. A red indicator blinked. One of the external cameras triggered by movement. Harper's room wasn't near that entrance, but the sudden alert prickled the back of every neck. "What was that?" Miriam asked. "Could be wind," a nurse said, "or drifting snow. The system gets jumpy in cold weather." But Ray was already moving. He stepped around the counter, leaning in toward the grainy black and white feed. The camera showed the side entrance, the one employees used after hours. Snow whipped past in thin, slanted lines. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a shape appeared. A figure stepped just inside the frame. Tall, hooded, half obscured by darkness and wind. Shoulders squared in a way Ray recognized far too well. The same man from the night before. Ray's hand tightened on the desk. "Not possible," he whispered. "He shouldn't be back. Not this soon." Miriam's breath hitched. "Ray, Harper said he'd come." As if responding to her words, the man turned toward the camera. The image distorted, static, rippling across the feed, but the sensation was clear. He wasn't looking at the hospital. He was looking for someone inside it. Ray hit the intercom. "Security to side entrance, now!" 2 guards rushed down the hall just as the figure moved out of view. Ray sprinted after them, boots echoing against polished tile. Miriam followed, heart pounding, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken since losing her child years ago. The guards reached the door first. They peered through frosted glass. Nothing but swirling snow. "He's gone," one muttered. "No." Ray stepped forward. "He's close." He shoved the door open, stepping onto the icy landing. Cold air burned his lungs. The parking lot stretched out under dim security lamps. Snow lay untouched, except for footprints. Fresh ones. Leading toward the service alley behind the hospital. Ray's instincts screamed. "Get inside," he ordered. "Lock the doors. Double-check every entrance. Emergency procedures, now." The guards ran. Ray lingered, staring into the white swirl. For a moment, just the briefest heartbeat, he thought he saw movement at the far edge of the lot. But when he blinked, only shadows remained, stretching long and thin across the snow. He re-entered the hospital, shaking frost from his jacket. Miriam waited, gripping her clipboard so tightly her knuckles whitened. "You think he's after Harper?" she whispered. Ray didn't sugarcoat it. "I think he wasn't done." Miriam's gaze drifted toward Harper's room. "Does she know he's here?" Before Ray could answer, Harper's voice echoed faintly down the hall. Frightened, breathless, not loud enough to call for help, but sharp enough to cut through every layer of silence. Miriam and Ray ran. Inside the room, Harper sat upright, knees pulled to her chest, eyes locked on the window that faced the hallway. "He's here," she whispered. "I saw his shadow." Ray turned to the glass, but no one stood there. Still, the tension clung to the floor, the walls, the air, as if the building itself had absorbed the man's presence. In the adjacent recovery bay, Boone did not stir, sedated, still healing, yet his monitor flickered with a sudden, subtle spike. Even unconscious, the dog sensed something. Ray knelt beside Harper's bed. "You're safe," he said softly. "We're watching every door, every hallway, every camera." Harper didn't take her eyes off the window. "He's closer than that," she whispered. "I can feel it." And Ray realized her voice carried the same trembling certainty Boone had shown the night before. A warning, not imagined, not exaggerated, instinctive. The east wing of Madison Ridge Hospital was always colder than the rest of the building. Something about the insulation never held heat properly. And on nights like this, nights soaked in fear and Montana winter, the temperature seemed to deepen the silence into something heavier. After calming Harper as best he could, Ray ordered additional security rounds and instructed the staff to keep emergency communication lines clear. But even with upgraded protection protocols active, he knew, in his gut, the man was still near. He didn't say it aloud. He didn't need to. Everyone felt it. Miriam lingered beside Harper's room, unable to step away. Harper clung to her blanket, gaze fixed on the window as if the shadow she'd seen might return at any moment. The hallway lights flickered once, just once, enough to make her shoulders tighten. Down the corridor, Boone lay sedated, though his body twitched with faint, unconscious effort, instincts fighting through layers of medication. Ray had just entered the east wing to check the exterior doors when something changed. A soft thud. Then a scrape. Metal. Brushing metal. Ray froze. He reached for his flashlight, stepping toward the bend in the hallway. The overhead fluorescents flickered again, washing the floor in uneven patches of light. His breath fogged in the cold. a sure sign the door at the end hadn't sealed properly. He gripped the industrial flashlight tighter, ready to use it as a weapon if he had to. The automatic door at the far end slid open an inch, not fully. Just enough to break the seals and let the cold in. Someone had overridden the lock system. Not wind, not malfunction. Someone intentional. Someone inside. Ray took a slow step forward. "Miriam," he said quietly over the radio, "keep Harper away from the windows and check on Boone." Before Miriam could answer, a shadow moved. A figure stepped into the hallway. Tall, wrapped in a heavy coat the color of soot. Snow melted slowly on his shoulders, trailing rivulets down thick fabric. His hood stayed up, but Ray recognized the posture instantly. Same man. Same unnerving stillness. Ray raised the flashlight. "Don't move. Sheriff's Department." The man didn't run. He didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if listening for something Ray couldn't hear. Behind Ray, Boone stirred. A low, strangled sound drifted down the hall. Even sedated, the dog sensed him. That was all it took. The man lunged. Ray reacted instantly, slamming his shoulder into the figure to drive him back toward the door. The impact echoed off the walls, sending a shock of fear down the corridor. Nurses gasped, ducking behind desks. Someone hit the emergency alarm, a high-pitched alert rippling through the hospital's security systems. The man shoved Ray hard, stronger than expected. Ray stumbled but stayed on his feet. He swung the flashlight. The man dodged, moving with sharp precision born from navigating dark, tight spaces. "Stop!" Ray shouted. "This ends now!" But the man didn't stop. He angled toward Harper's room. Ray realized it too late. "No!" He sprinted down the hall. Harper heard it too. She sat up, eyes wide, staring through the glass as the shadow streaked past. Her breath hitched, hands clenching the blanket so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then everything happened at once. Boone, despite sedation, forced himself off the stretcher. His legs buckled immediately, but he dragged himself forward, claws scraping against tile. "Boone, no, you can't," Miriam cried, frozen mid-step. But the dog's instincts drowned everything else out. He threw, his weight toward the hallway, collapsing, pushing again, eyes locked on Harper's room. The man reached the doorway. Harper screamed. Ray tackled him from behind. They hit the floor, sliding hard. Papers scattered. A cart toppled. Metal clattered across linoleum. The man tried to wrench free, but Ray held on, muscles burning with raw desperation. Security arrived seconds later, pinning the intruder's arms before he could regain footing. Ray leaned back on his heels, breathless, heart pounding so loudly he barely heard the alarm overhead. Miriam rushed to Harper, gathering the girl in her arms. Harper sobbed into her shoulder, trembling so hard Miriam wrapped both arms around her just to keep her anchored. Boone lay in the doorway of the recovery bay, chest heaving, eyes fixed on Harper. Painful, devoted, unbroken. Ray rose slowly, meeting Miriam's eyes. "It's not over," he said quietly. "Not until we know who this man is." And for the first time, Harper whispered through her tears, "I know his voice." The east wing quieted slowly after the struggle, though Harper's scream still lingered in the corners of the hallway, like a thin frost refusing to melt. Security had taken the intruder away, Ray following close behind, determined to get answers the moment the man spoke. But inside the hospital, all attention shifted toward something far more fragile than any captured threat. Boone. His collapse in the doorway hadn't been dramatic. Just a quiet surrender, a body too loyal for its own survival. When Miriam knelt beside him, his breathing was shallow, his pulse fluttering beneath his ribs like a candle wavering in wind. A stretcher slid beneath him again, the team moving swiftly toward surgical care, voices tense with the kind of urgency that comes when time is thin. Harper stood in the hallway, trembling so hard her knees nearly buckled. Miriam turned toward her, voice steady only on the surface. "He needs surgery," she said softly. "They'll do everything they can." Harper's lower lip trembled. "Can I go with him?" "You can't go into the operating room, sweetheart, but you can wait right outside." The girl nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her gown, the movement small and strangely adult. Miriam led her to the waiting area outside the ICU monitoring wing, where the lights glowed softer and the heaters hummed with gentle persistence. Harper sat on a bench much too big for her, hugging her knees to her chest. In her hands, she held Boone's worn leather collar, removed just before surgery, gripping it with a reverence that made Miriam swallow hard. Behind the glass, Boone was wheeled into the surgical bay. The overhead lights snapped on, bright, clinical, unforgiving. A team of specialists gathered, veterinary officers, surgeons trained in emergency animal care, technicians preparing instruments. It wasn't common for a retired K9 to receive this level of treatment, but this wasn't a common dog. Cedar Hill wasn't about to lose him without a fight. Ray returned briefly, face drawn but composed. "They're processing the intruder," he told Miriam quietly. "He's refusing to talk. Not a word." Miriam nodded, eyes drifting to Harper. She's holding herself together because Boone isn't gone yet. Ray followed her gaze. Harper stared at the window, fear and faith woven tightly together, as if Boone might sense she was waiting and decide not to give up. Then the surgery began. Inside, the room shifted into controlled chaos, hands passing instruments, voices low but sharp, monitors tracking every fragile heartbeat. Boone's chest rose and fell unevenly. His previous injuries had weakened him, and the stress of the confrontation had pushed him beyond his limits. "Blood pressure's dropping," Reinforce the sutures. Start another drip. Now. Every command felt like a plea disguised as procedure. Harper pressed her forehead to the glass, whispering into the small circle of fog her breath created. Please don't leave me, not now, not after everything. Minutes stretched. 30, 60, 90. At the 2-hour mark, Boone's vitals dipped abruptly. The tone of the room changed. Colder, sharper, unmistakable. "What's happening?" Harper cried, jerking upright. Miriam knelt beside her. Sometimes bodies get tired during long surgeries. They're helping him, Harper. Inside the room, Boone's monitor flatlined. One terrifying second. A lifetime. A surgeon pressed paddles to his chest. Clear. Boone's body jolted. Again. Clear. Miriam held Harper close as the girl gasped, tears dripping onto Boone's collar. Then, a flicker, a weak, wavering beep. Then two, then a fragile rhythm struggling back to life. "He's responding!" someone inside shouted. Harper sagged into Miriam's arms, crying now not from fear, but from relief. The kind of relief that feels like breath after drowning. 4 hours passed before the surgical team stepped back, exhausted, but standing taller. Ray returned just in time to hear the surgeon say, "He made it. He's not out of danger yet, but he made it." Harper's face lifted, hope trembling through her smile. Boone wasn't saved. Not fully. But he had fought to stay. For her. Morning settled slowly over Madison Ridge Hospital. The winter sun rising like a pale coin behind drifting clouds. The world outside remained cold, indifferent. But inside the ICU wing, where Harper had spent the night pressed against Boone's collar, the air held a different weight. A cautious, fragile hope. A hope stitched together not by certainty, but by survival. Boone was stable now, though heavily sedated, resting beneath soft, humming lights in the recovery bay. Harper had been allowed to sit beside him for a few precious minutes before being guided back to her room. She had touched his paw gently, whispering something only he could hear. And though he didn't move, the monitor beside him flickered in a way that felt almost like recognition. When Miriam returned, she found Harper sitting quietly on her bed, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap. The girl didn't look afraid, not exactly. Instead, she looked braced, as if she understood something was coming. "Harper," Miriam said softly, pulling a chair close. "Ray needs to talk with you again. Only if you're ready." Harper nodded once. No trembling this time. When Ray entered, hat in his hands, expression softer than his badge usually allowed, he sat beside the bed instead of towering over her. "We caught the man," he began gently. "He's in custody now." Harper's eyes lifted. "Did he talk?" "No," Ray admitted. "Not yet. But we know who he is." Harper's shoulders pulled inward, not from fear, but from recognition. His name is Owen Cree, Ray continued. He worked a seasonal job near your neighborhood. He noticed you. That wasn't your fault. Sometimes people like him watch children and think they won't be missed. Miriam watched Harper's face, ready to intervene if the weight became too much. But Harper stayed steady. I remember him, she whispered. He followed me once. I told my dad, but he said maybe Owen just got confused. Ray nodded, patient, understanding how adults often misread danger. Sometimes grown-ups don't see danger the way kids do, he said. That doesn't mean you were wrong. Harper breathed slowly. He said I wouldn't get away, that nobody would find me. Her fingers slid along the blanket. But Boone found me. He always knew where I was. Ray leaned forward. That's what I want to ask you about. When Boone appeared, did he come from the trees? Did he follow your voice? Did Owen bring him? Harper shook her head. Boone wasn't with Owen. He came later. She took a breath. I heard something. Heavy steps in the snow. I thought it was Owen coming back. But it wasn't. It was Boone. Ray exchanged a glance with Miriam, surprised, but not dismissing it. How did he know where you were? Ray asked. Harper bit her lip. Her voice softened, not with fear, but with memory. I think he was looking for me before I even called. She continued, voice trembling but sure. When he saw me, when he saw the rope, he growled. Not angry. More like he was saying, it's okay. I'm here now. She swallowed. Owen didn't like that. He threw things. He yelled. But Boone didn't leave. He lay down next to me. Even when the wind was loud. Even when Owen hit the walls. Ray swallowed hard. Did he ever hurt you directly? Harper hesitated. Miriam rested a hand gently on her shoulder. No, Harper whispered. He scared me. He pushed me. He grabbed my arm once, but he didn't hurt me. Not like that. Ray nodded, relief flickering beneath the surface. Thank you, he said softly. This helps us understand what charges to file and what kind of support you'll need. Harper barely heard. Her eyes drifted again toward the hallway, toward the place where Boone rested. He saved me, she murmured. He saved me even when he was hurt. Miriam smiled softly, and now it's our turn to help him. Harper leaned back against the pillows. Truth finally spoken. Not all of it. Not every shadow of the woods, but enough to stop the darkness from growing. Outside her window, snow fell quietly, as if giving her permission to rest. The sun had climbed higher than usual for a Montana winter, sitting pale and low, like a lantern hung in a frosted sky. Its light spilled gently through the windows of Madison Ridge Hospital, softening the edges of cold metal and worn linoleum. A rare warmth, thin, but present enough to remind everyone inside that seasons, even the hardest ones, eventually turn. Boone lay in the recovery bay, wrapped in a soft blanket, the color of wheat fields. His breathing was steadier now, though slow, and a faint shimmer of life pulsed gently through his flank with each fought-for breath. The monitors beeped a steady, reliable rhythm, a welcome contrast to the unstable stutter Miriam had heard just the night before. Harper stood at the threshold, barefoot, dressed in fresh hospital pajamas. Boone's collar clutched tightly against her chest. Miriam had asked if she wanted help walking, but Harper had shaken her head. She wanted to do this part alone. "Are you ready?" Miriam asked gently. Harper nodded. They opened the door. Boone didn't lift his head immediately, not out of disinterest, but because waking required careful negotiation between will and pain. But the moment Harper's steps crossed the room, his ear twitched. Then he opened his eyes, slow, blinking, adjusting, but aware. Harper's breath caught. "Hi, boy," she whispered. "I'm here." Boone tried to move, but Miriam stepped in gently. "Easy, Boone. Don't rush." He stopped pushing, settling instead for a softer gesture, lifting one paw just a few inches off the blanket, trembling with the effort. Harper moved closer, lowering to her knees beside him. The collar slipped from her fingers onto the blanket between them. She reached out. Boone pressed his head into her palm. It wasn't dramatic. Times 600 pounds, not triumphant. Just a small, exhausted lean. A surrender of fear, of uncertainty, of everything they had endured in the woods. And it was enough to make Miriam step back, swallowing the ache rising in her throat. "You made it," Harper whispered, stroking Boone's muzzle with a tenderness people rarely give themselves. "You really, really made it." Boone exhaled slowly, a warm breath falling across her wrist. His tail thumped once against the blanket. Weak, but purposeful. Ray entered quietly, hat in hand, careful not to disrupt the moment. He had seen reunions before. Families, search teams, loved ones brought together after emergencies. But this one struck deeper. This bond wasn't built on ownership or obligation. It was built on shared survival, stitched from cold nights, hunger, danger, and hope. "How's he doing?" Ray asked softly. "Better," Miriam said. "Not out of the woods yet, but he's responding." His vitals improved after Harper woke. Ray nodded. "Figures. The two of them. They run on the same current." Harper didn't turn. She kept whispering to Boone, words only he could understand, her fingers moving gently through his fur. Boone's breathing deepened. Miriam watched the monitor. Numbers shifting, improving, unmistakably tied to Harper's presence. It was beyond medicine, beyond logic, beyond anything she had ever read in recovery or rehabilitation manuals. It was the simple miracle of recognition. Harper finally looked up. "Can he go outside? When he's better?" Ray smiled gently. "Eventually. He'll need therapy, rest, and a whole lot of patience, but yeah, he'll walk again. Might even run." Harper grinned, the first true smile since she arrived. Boone nudged her hand. Sunlight shifted across the room, warming the floor, where Harper knelt. And for a brief, quiet moment, the sterile hospital room felt like the edge of a meadow, golden, open, safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because they were no longer facing it alone. Harper leaned down, resting her forehead gently against Boone's. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me." And though Boone couldn't speak, the soft rumble in his chest said everything that needed saying. The air outside Madison Ridge Hospital felt different that morning. Lighter, almost curious. Winter in Cedar Hill had finally loosened its grip. The snow that once buried the valley in silence now thinned into scattered patches of white, softening under the early spring sun. Miriam pushed open the back doors gently, letting Harper step out first. Boone followed beside Ray, still stitched, still healing, but undeniably present in a way that made the world feel steadier. Harper stayed close to Boone, her small hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Every few steps, she glanced up, checking he was still there, still breathing, still walking beneath the open sky. It was the kind of day meant for quiet rebirth, a day where even the mountains seemed to exhale. Ray gestured toward the meadow beyond the parking lot. "Figured this would be a good spot," he said softly. "Flat ground, warm sun, and not too far from help if we need it." Miriam nodded. "Exactly what our wellness programs recommend. Fresh air, gentle movement, slow exposure to the outdoors." She smiled at Harper. "It helps your mind breathe a little better, too." Harper didn't answer, but she squeezed Boone's fur, and that was answer enough. They stepped onto the meadow, still damp from melting snow. Patches of golden grass poked through like tiny torches rising from the earth. Boone sniffed the air, the breeze brushing his muzzle. Something in him shifted. His ears pricked. His tail rose, just slightly, as if a memory drifted on the wind. Harper followed his gaze. On the ridge beyond the meadow, a dark figure stood. Massive, still, watching with the quiet intelligence of something that belonged to the land long before any house or road existed. Baldur. The wild horse's coat shimmered against the pale sky. Dark chestnut, almost bronze. His mane lifted in the breeze, stance calm, dignified. Harper's hand tightened on Boone. But Boone didn't move. He simply watched, understanding in a way only he could. Ray whispered, "Well, I'll be damned. He really came back." Miriam exhaled softly, careful not to disturb the moment. Maybe he never left, she murmured. Maybe he was waiting for this. Harper stepped forward slowly, not from bravery, but from recognition. Baldur pawed at the ground once, not warning, not retreat, but acknowledgement. Boone gave a gentle woof, the sound dogs use when seeing something familiar yet distant, like an old friend passing at the edge of town. Harper whispered, "He saw us out there. I think he kept watch." Miriam glanced at Ray but said nothing. Some truths didn't need scientific grounding. They lived in the space between danger and hope, where instinct often understood more than logic. Baldur held their gaze a moment longer, then turned, hooves soft against thawing earth, disappearing into the thinning trees as silently as he had arrived. Harper released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Boone nudged her hand. They walked deeper into the meadow. Boone taking slow, steady steps. Each movement a small victory, a reminder that healing rarely arrives all at once. Harper matched her stride to his, stopping when he stopped, stepping forward when he did, patience woven into every motion. Ray watched with quiet pride. "You know," he murmured to Miriam, "if our insurance plans covered emotional recovery, those two would be the best case study this town ever had." Miriam chuckled softly. "They already are." Harper knelt beside Boone, both of them framed by pale sunlight. Boone lowered himself with a soft grunt, resting his chin in her lap. The meadow shimmered, as if welcoming them home. No drama, no alarms, no fear crawling through hospital hallways. Just a girl, a dog, and a meadow learning how to breathe again. It was the closest thing to peace either of them had felt in months. For weeks after the snow melted across Cedar Hill, the town lived with a softer heartbeat. People spoke of Harper and Boone not with shock anymore, but with reverence. The quiet kind reserved for stories that remind folks why they believe in goodness at all. Even the doctors at Madison Ridge Hospital, who had seen their fair share of tragedy, found themselves pausing when they passed the window overlooking the meadow. It was as if the land still held the imprint of two souls learning how to survive again. One early morning, Miriam Cole stood at that window, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand. She watched Harper walk across the grass with Boone at her side. Slow, steady, unhurried, the kind of pace that said, "We made it." Boone's coat caught the golden light, and for a brief second he looked younger, freer, almost like the seasoned police dog he once was, before life carved deeper stories into his frame. Ray stepped beside her. "Town's different since they came through those doors," he murmured. Miriam nodded. "I think Boone brought more than a child to safety. He brought this place something we were missing." Ray chuckled softly. "Hope?" "No," Miriam whispered. "Proof." Ray frowned. "Proof of what?" that sometimes the world still chooses kindness, even after everything. Outside, Harper crouched in the grass, tracing tiny circles in the soft dirt, while Boone nudged her shoulder, urging her to stand. She giggled, a sound so light it seemed to float on the morning wind. Miriam watched longer than she meant to, thinking of all the nights she'd questioned whether she was still strong enough for this work. Helping Harper had reminded her why she stayed. Sometimes healing wasn't in medicine alone. Sometimes it came from something unnamed, something like loyalty, or presence, or the simple act of not giving up on someone. When Harper and Boone returned to the hospital entrance, Boone paused at the exact spot where he had collapsed weeks ago. His eyes lifted to the doors, not in fear, but in recognition. Harper touched his ear gently. "You remember, don't you?" Boone leaned into her palm. Ray approached slowly. "You two heading home soon?" Harper nodded. "Aunt June says we can go this weekend. She signed me up for a family care program, and Boone gets to stay with us forever." "That's good," Ray said softly. "Those are solid services. Gives folks a real chance to start over." He hesitated. "You feel safe now, kiddo?" Harper didn't answer right away. She looked up at Boone, her hand still resting on his neck. "I feel found." The sentence was small, but it squeezed something deep inside Miriam's chest. Being found wasn't the same as being rescued. Being found meant someone chose you, searched for you, refused to let the world swallow you whole. Harper stepped toward the doors, then paused and turned back.